David Lepofsky. I'll spell that. It's Lepofsky. I'm the chair of the Ontarians with Disabilities Act Committee. We are a nonpartisan, province-wide coalition of both individuals, people with disabilities and people without disabilities, and of over 100 community organizations, which united about 5.5 years ago, and which is organized now in 19 regions of the province, to advocate for a strong and effective Ontarians with Disabilities Act to be passed in this province. I really want to tell you about two things this morning, if I may. The first is to tell you about an incredible event that's been going on in Ontario over the past month. See, almost 5 years ago, Premier Harris promised us in writing during the 1995 election that in his very first term, he would do two things. He would pass the Ontarians with Disabilities Act, and he would personally work with our coalition to develop that law. A copy of that letter is available on the table over at the side. In Premier Harris's first term, he broke both of those promises. He did not pass the Ontarians with Disabilities Act, and he refused to even meet with us. Not once. Indeed, in the almost 5 years that he's been in office, he has been unwilling to even spare an hour of his time to sit down with us and talk about what should be included in the law he promised. We have been organizing and active right across the province of Ontario over the past almost 5.5 years, reaching out to the public to garner support for what we're looking for. What are we looking for? Well, a summary is available on the table over there, and we delivered our proposals to the government over almost about 2 years ago. But we're looking for a new law which will be effective and strong at achieving a barrier-free Ontario for the 1.5 million plus Ontarians who have a disability. We're looking for a law that will require barriers to be removed in an orderly way and for new barriers to be prevented. What kind of barriers? People with disabilities face barriers pretty much every day of their lives, whether they're trying to get a job or use our healthcare system or get an education or just go to the park. Some of those barriers are physical barriers, like steps to get on a newly purchased bus purchased with our tax dollars, or steps to get into a new newly renovated store or whatever. Some of those barriers are informational, such as the lack of Braille on the buttons of many, if not most, public elevators. Some of those barriers we face are communicational. Deaf people who go to our hospitals still are not assured that they will get sign language interpreters provided for them so they can communicate with a doctor in the emergency room and tell them what the medical emergency is. And that's the case even though 2.5 years ago the Supreme Court of Canada ordered that provincial governments have to make sure those sign language interpreters are provided. The barriers go on and on. We're looking for a new law to get rid of those barriers. We were promised a new law to get rid of those barriers, and we do not yet have that law almost 5 years after it was promised. What is the extraordinary event over the past month? We see in the last election, the 99 election, Premier Harris promised that, well, he goofed last time, he'll get it right this time. His government will consult with the public on how to do it right. But since assuming office, the Harris government has not held a public consultation like they said they were going to. Instead, the Citizenship Minister, Helen Johns, has been holding some sort of secret, closed, invitation-only meetings. And we don't know who she's meeting with because she's keeping her invitation list secret. This could not be a more unpublic consultation if you tried. So what's happened in the past month is that the Ontario Liberal Party had decided that if the government was not going to hold public consultations, the Liberal Party would. We are a nonpartisan coalition. We will work with anyone who will try to achieve the goal of a barrier-free Ontario through a strong Ontarians with Disabilities Act. Indeed, when the previous, now defeated Citizenship Minister, Isabel Bassett, went about holding her own closed-door invitation-only consultations, we actually did more to tell the public about her consultation than she did. So, in any event, the Liberal Party decided to do a very ambitious 15-city tour of public consultation forums right across Ontario in the month of March. It has been amazing. There has been an incredible turnout. The turnout has been of real Ontarians, people with disabilities and people without disabilities, people who care about the 1.5 million Ontarians with disabilities. And there has been an overwhelming showing that we face these incredible barriers and that we need strong legislation to get rid of those barriers and to make sure no new ones are ever created again. If you'd like a sample of the media coverage, the print media coverage that's been available across Ontario about these events, they're located also on the table over to the side. It's really been incredible because this shows how much need there is to hear from the public and how much need there is for this legislation, how much support there is for this legislation, how overdue this legislation really is. Well, what's the government of Ontario done about it? That's the other thing I'd like to turn your attention to. What's the Ontario government done about this? Well, for 3 years in office, they did nothing. Then, in '98, they held a secret, closed-door, invitation-only consultation process that was pretty much denounced by everybody. Then, they introduced a 3-page do-nothing bill in November of '98, which even the government concedes was inadequate because they've agreed that they've got to do better. It did not require a single barrier to be removed anywhere. You really couldn't do less for us than that in the way of legislation. Then the government promised more consultations in the last election, and as I said, instead of actually going out and talking to the public, the government has been holding its secret meetings with we don't know who. They won't tell us. But most recently, the government has shown that frankly they don't know where they're going. The minister responsible, Helen Johns, gave us a really positive signal last September 10th when she told the London September 11th, when she was reported to have told the London Free Press that a new Disability Act would be a huge priority for her. This suggested a really renewed, improved look at this and a hope that things were going to be done right this time around. Unfortunately, since then, we've just seen no real action. And this culminated this past Saturday on a TV broadcast called Inquiry by the New PL station in London, where the minister, who herself has not gone to any of the Liberal Party's consultation forums anywhere in the province, actually told the viewing audience that from the people with disabilities she's hearing from, we don't know who they are, and indeed the people with disabilities that Steve Peters of the Liberal Party is hearing from, and she hasn't even gone to the hearings, somehow they don't, it seems, want legislation. I can tell you with utter confidence that there is an overwhelming support for the need for legislation. And if the minister in charge of keeping the Premier's promise to pass this legislation has spiraled from telling us that legislation is a huge priority to giving the sense that she thinks that people don't really want or aren't talking about legislation, the government is clearly spiraling downward and frankly out of control on this issue. The big question, why won't the Premier act? And why won't the Premier meet with us? Frankly, I get asked that question by journalists, probably more than any other question I've been asked on this topic since I started getting involved in this issue about 5.5 years. And frankly, it doesn't make any sense. The Premier has every reason to act, and to act boldly and with leadership. After all, he made the promise. He promised the legislation, and he says that he does what he says he's going to do. He says he keeps all his promises. Frankly, the Premier would secure massive support for this kind of legislation. Both opposition parties are on side. His party's on record for supporting this legislation. From what we've seen, from what the Liberal consultation forums have shown, and frankly, from the media coverage over the past several years on this issue, it's clear that there's strong public support, and this issue is not going away. The support for it gets stronger and stronger every day. Why won't the Premier act? Why won't he find an hour in 5 years to even meet with us? Frankly, he's gotten a lot of bad press over this issue. One would think that even if you looked at this as a question of raw politics, it would seem to make a lot more sense to act on this and show leadership and get the credit, rather than to keep delaying and stalling and get the blame. Why won't the Premier act? Well, this afternoon, I encourage you folks to come and not just hear what I've just had to say, but to hear from people with disabilities and people without disabilities who are coming to Queen's Park for the final culminating public hearings that the Liberal Party is holding right in this building from 4:30 to 7:30. We encourage you to hear from those folks, to talk to them, and to find out about the barriers they face every day of their lives. The debate is over. The debate over whether we should have this legislation is over. The Premier promised it, there is overwhelming support for it, and the people coming today are going to tell you why we need it. The only person who seems to be caught up in trying to reopen that debate is Helen Johns, the minister who Premier Harris has assigned responsibility for it. This shows more than ever why the Premier must step in, must show leadership, must meet with us, and must plot a new direction so we can get off this stalled process and get this legislation passed. I'd be delighted to take any questions that any of you may have.
Is there a possibility that perhaps your group is viewed as too demanding, and that they are seeking perhaps other people in the community that would make less demands on the in terms of legislative demands, or could that be why you've been shut out of the process?
It's not. Firstly, anything I tell you is going to be speculative because the person who can answer that question is Mike Harris. But my best speculation is this. It seems that the government just doesn't know what they want to do. And it isn't just the Ontarians with Disabilities Act Committee that's been shut out of the process. It's really the people who've been shut out of the process. You see, the people who are coming this afternoon, the people who've come to 14 other events from Barrie to Thunder Bay to North Bay to Windsor to St. Catharines and so on, they're people from all walks of life, people with disabilities from all corners of the province, just voters, citizens of our province, a cross-section of the 1.5 million people with disabilities. They've been shut out of the process too. We've been pushing for this process to be opened up, not just so that we can be heard, so that indeed everybody can be heard. Moreover, the government, if they think, or if they've convinced themselves that we're somehow, as you've described, the problem is they've never sat down and had a meaningful discussion with us to find out if their presuppositions are true. We've tabled a bunch of proposals. We've indicated over and over and over again that we're open to dialogue, that we're open to different ways of approaching this legislation. But the only real point that can't be compromised is we want the legislation to be strong and effective. And on that point, the government's agreed. They supported unanimously a resolution that Mr. Peters of the Liberal Party put forward on November 23rd of this past year, calling for this law to be enacted within the next 2 years, and for it to be strong and effective. So even that, the debate's over on that one. They've agreed.
What are the proposals that you've tabled?
The proposals that we've tabled, which again we've summarized in a document that you've got over on the desk, which we've got a more detailed brief that we delivered about 2 years ago, embody the 11 principles that the legislature unanimously approved by resolution on October 29 of 1998. Basically, we need a law which will require barriers that face people with disabilities around the province to be identified and for plans to be made to remove them in an orderly way. Some of them cost nothing to remove, or virtually nothing, and can be removed really quickly. Those should go right away. Some of them may cost more to be removed. If it takes longer, there should be reasonable timelines, but they should be removed along reasonable timelines. And the other thing that we want in the legislation is a requirement that new barriers be prevented before they ever happen. That costs virtually nothing. The government has announced, as you'll recall, during the last election, 20 or some odd $billion of new infrastructure. We need a law in place that will ensure that all the infrastructure that's created with those taxpayer dollars is barrier-free when it's designed and when it's built. It's a lot easier to get rid of those, to prevent those barriers before they happen. And that's what we want to make sure of right now. That in broad terms is what we're looking for. And we're looking for a law that will have an effective method for enforcement that maximizes the results of getting rid of these barriers and preventing new ones, that also provides to people reasonable chance to have input into how this is all to be done, and that is provides as well support and guidance for folks who need assistance in doing this.
Dave, Richard Brennan from the Toronto Star. I think Antonella might have a point here. Do you think you might have isolated yourself? You've been in their face, and God bless you, I guess, for 5 years on this. This government is notorious for isolating people, and they call them special interest groups, and from henceforth they don't speak to them or don't deal with them again. Now, could you, by being so aggressive and reminding the government of the shortfalls, actually have just kind of painted yourself in a corner here?
I don't think so, and I don't think so for a couple of reasons. Firstly, they made the promise to work with, the Premier made the promise to work together with us, and he's been refusing to meet with us since the get-go, so it's nothing to do with what we've done. I mean, he refused from the start and continues. You'll see the latest invitation to him in writing sent last week, right over on the table over there. Secondly, we start with each of the successive ministers that we've had. We've been given 3 ministers to work with. We've started with each of them sitting down and saying, "Hey, we'd like to meet with you. We'd like to work together." The first minister wouldn't even talk to us for meet with us for the first year, and so on. But with each of them, we sit down and we, in a spirit of cooperativeness, offer our assistance, and we get the door slammed in our face. We've only had to resort to the reminding of them of their broken promises when they've shown a complete unwillingness to sit down. So we're left with 2 options. One is to just say, well, go away, at which point it's clear they would do nothing. Or the other is to try to get the voice out there for this kind of legislation, a broader and stronger voice. And in that regard, we've gone from being 20 people in a room when we were founded 5.5 or 5 1/4 years ago to 19 regions around the province who are flooding to any opportunity they have, as in the case of Mr. Peters' events, to have their voices heard. The reality is that we are also trying our best to come forward with a positive message. Yes, there are times that we have to be critical. If a promise is broken, a promise is broken. There's nothing else you can do about it. But our aim is to come forward with positive suggestions. 2 years ago, when the government was still stalling on even talking to anyone about this, we developed a comprehensive brief, delivered it to them. They didn't even show up to receive it. It's in this very room. And offered an opportunity to dialogue with them on it. So we've been doing everything we can, no matter how many times we get slapped in the face by them not talking to us, by not meeting with us, by offering us a 3-page bill that does nothing. We always go back to offering an opportunity to work constructively.
Thank you.
Other questions?
That's it.
Okay. Well, thank you all for coming, and I encourage you to come at 4:30 and see what people have to say.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.